Hello, my random viewers, and welcome to Randomly Offensive. Today, we will be continuing the story of Genetic Blessings with Part 1, Chapter 4. And if you have missed the previous chapters, they will be linked at the tippy top of this video right here, right now, if you want to clickety on them and check them out if you're interested, and come on back. That is just fine with me. So, with that being said, we will now be starting Genetic Blessings, Part 1, Chapter 4. It is early morning as Jasmine is forced awake by an aroma and the smell of a sweet, delicious breakfast. And as she looks at her clock, she sees it is only 5:30, and so she gets out of her bed and exits her room to see who might be cooking such a delicious-smelling breakfast, to see that Al is exiting his room to do the same thing. "Do you smell that?" says Jasmine, and Al looks at Jasmine. "It smells like breakfast. It made its way in my dream, but you were the one cooking, so I instantly knew it was a dream," he says, and Jasmine glares back at him. "I cook," she says, and Al looks back at her. "Cereal doesn't count, Jasmine. Cereal has never counted." And so the two make their way to the kitchen, and as they enter, they see Alex happily making a large breakfast with eggs, bacon, and pancakes while brewing a pot of coffee. "You're, making breakfast?" says Al to Alex. However, Al is only responded to with a shriek from Alex as she drops the spatula, and she looks back at him. "Sorry, not used to anyone else being up this early," she says as she grabs the spatula off the ground, rinses it off, and begins using it once more. Al and Jasmine decide to sit at the table as they watch Alex seemingly doing this out of pure routine and gets all the plates put together for everyone that works at the GBA, plus one for herself and Vince. And as she sets Vince's plate down on the table, she pours him a cup of coffee with sugar and cream. And Al looks at this. "I always figured Vince would be the type to drink his coffee black," says Al. And Alex nods her head. "Only in public, or when people are watching, but by himself, he likes his creamer and his sugar," says Alex. She then takes out a pack of cigarettes and pulls one of the cigarettes halfway out as she gently sets it on the table next to the plate, and then sets a lighter next to the pack. As she sits down and begins eating her meal, Vince then walks into the kitchen. Seeing Al, Jasmine, and Alex all feasting, he sits down, and without looking, as if it is nothing more than muscle memory, he reaches and grabs for the cigarette that's sticking halfway out of the pack, while simultaneously, with one sweep of the hand, grabbing the lighter and lighting it. And as Jasmine and Al watches this, they notice that Vince sat down with the expectation of all of it already being prepared and ready. And Al looks at Alex with amazement. That's impressive," says Al. "What is?" says Vince as he smokes his cigarette. And Al just looks back. "Well, just the whole thing. It's kind of impressive. I don't think I've ever seen anyone just sit down expecting a meal and a cigarette sticking halfway out of his pack," he says, and Vince just ignores him as he smokes his cigarette and when he finishes, he then begins eating the breakfast. With Al and Jasmine already finishing theirs, Jim, Jake, and the Chief have all woken up to the same smell that woke up Al and Jasmine, and so they take the needed time to relax and enjoy the breakfast Alex has prepared for them. And so, after the breakfast, Alex walks to the training grounds and begins setting up somewhat of an office as she props up a table and puts together a computer system with many monitors and many computer towers. As she looks at it with pride, "Alright, I suppose it's time to get to work," she says to herself, as the rest of the crew, including Vince, has finally entered the training grounds. "And what kind of work would that be?" says the Chief, as Alex looks at him with a smile and hits a few keys on her keyboard that prints out multiple sheets of paper and hands it to him. As the Chief looks at the papers, he sees documents of 4 people. One man who has been imprisoned multiple times and gone to jail a multiple amount of times, who has the record of being a drug dealer, with, beside that, a record of a missing little girl, and then 2 more records of 2 men who have been robbing the likes of gas stations and grocery stores and pawn shops. As the Chief looks up, "Are these genetic blessings?" says the Chief to Alex, and Alex nods her head. "Yes, they are genetic blessings. However, they have ties with larger organizations that can lead us to more genetic blessings, and genetic blessings that have a more hierarchy level of power than what you guys are normally going up against," says Alex, with Vince continuing her explanation. "These genetic blessings are our first step into actually reducing the amount of genetic blessings that have been popping up throughout the world. These genetic blessings have ties, like Alex said, to larger, more powerful groups. And if we can take out the powerful genetic blessings, if we can take out the genetic blessings that have gone under your nose and have entered establishments of power, then the rest will be cake," says Vince, and the Chief looks at him. "So, that's the plan. Take out the powerful, and then the weak will follow," says the Chief. As he continues looking at the papers, he sends them back to Alex and looks at his crew of Jim, Jasmine, Al, Jake, and Vince. "Well, I suppose we should team up Alex, Vince, and Jasmine for the man and the little girl, and then we will team up Al, Jim, and Jake for the other 2, says the Chief, with Al speaking up. "Well, now, hold on," says Al. I was told that my first mission I got to be with Jasmine, and I think I should be replacing Alex, because I'm obviously capable of taking down Vince," says Al, with Vince laughing at his words, the Chief trying to hold back his own amusement, with Jim looking at Al disapprovingly, and Jasmine biting her tongue, trying to not show any emotions so that she does not upset or cause unneeded drama with Al, And so Jim decides to speak up, as Al is obviously getting frustrated at their reactions.
I don't know if that is very accurate, Al. Vince was holding back tenfold in your guys' fight, and it was obvious that he was holding back on all of us. Of course, I wouldn't expect you to know that,
says Jim, with Vince forcing his laughter to stop and looking at Al.
I simply needed to know what roles you guys played and how you guys would react, and you absolutely did not disappoint, Al. I feel very confident in the partnership that I have made with you,
says Vince, with Al staring at him with anger, reasonably so, since all he got to see was Vince attacking the GBA, followed by him choking Jasmine. And so Al decides to respond to Vince with zero hesitation. I'm pretty sure you beaten the shit out of my friends, and choking Jasmine was a little extreme on that end, wasn't it? Says Al, with Alex joining the side of Al, looks at Vince angrily. That does seem a little too far, says Alex as she looks at Vince. I don't want to hear about you doing anything like that again, she says, as the rest of the crew waits for Vince to get upset or angry. Vince just simply nods his head.
Sorry, Alex. I left that part out of the plan for a reason,
says Vince, as the chief pours himself a glass of whiskey, for it is nearly 7 o'clock, as Vince lights up a second cigarette, and the chief looks at the crew.
It's decided then. Vince, Alex, and Jasmine, you will be heading to the location of these 2 genetic blessings, and Al, you will be with Jim and Jake. We will make sure that an amateur like yourself will survive. Alrighty, Al. Grab your spear and follow me,
says Jim.
I'll show you how we do the investigation and pinpoint the genetic blessings,
he says as he waves Al to follow him and Jake. And though Al does not like the situation he's been put in, he decides to go along with it anyways, as Jasmine looks at Vince. Well, I suppose we should do the same thing. You remember how we do the investigation and pinpointing, so it should be easy, she says to Vince. However, Vince looks back at her.
No,
says Vince, as Jasmine responds, no? What do you mean, no? She says,
your way of doing investigations and pinpointing will take too much time. The man with the little girl is a drug dealer, meaning he has ties with my organization, and that should make it pretty easy to find him,
says Vince as he begins walking out of the GBA with Alex. And though Jasmine does not like the situation that she is now in, she decides to go along with it anyway, just like Al is forced to do the same. And she follows Vince and Alex into their fancy car. As Vince drives, they approach a building that is an odd style of building. It has a very nice exterior, however, the landscaping is all but trashed, with broken fencing and trash all over. And as they walk into the building, Jasmine finally realizes the kind of world Vince has been living in. The second they walked into the door, Jasmine sees the building full of all sorts of criminals, drug dealers, robbers, murderers, traffickers, and those who are simply waiting out warrants for their arrest as they find refuge in this building. with Alex displaying visible fear as she holds the back of Vince's blazer suit jacket as he confidently walks through the hallway of this building, not worried one bit about the environment they are in, as every single criminal seems to make sure not to make eye contact with Vince, showing a superiority with Vince and the rest of the criminals who lay dormant in the building, as Jasmine is making sure not to fall too far behind Vince and Alex, though she's sure she can take on normal people after confronting countless genetic blessings. She is not sure how many of these criminals are mortals, or how many of them might be genetic blessings hiding away. And so Vince continues walking, and he finally makes it to the back of the building, where there is a fancy door made out of oak, and as he opens it, there sits a man who looks like he tries to dress nice, but doesn't have the budget for it. As he looks at Vince, "What are you doing here?" says the man, visibly intimidated by the appearance of Vince. As Vince puts his hand out towards Alex, Alex quickly reaches into her computer bag and pulls out the files of the 2 genetic blessings, and Vince slams it down on his desk. "I need to know where these 2 are," says Vince, as the man takes a quick peek at it and puts on his reading glasses. "Alright, let me type in the name," he says, as he types in the names on his computers. "Oh, yeah. The man's name is George. I don't have anything on, well, the girl," he says, as he looks at the computer screen with his face far closer than necessary. His numbers are incredible. He's a dealer in New York, and, well, I'm not gonna tell you exactly where," says the man, as he looks up at Vince, obviously trying to come off unintimidated, but the sweat and the shaky hands gives it away, as Vince looks at him. "And just exactly why will you not tell me their location?" says Vince. "Well, because whenever you ask about someone who has a genetic blessing that works for us, they end up dead," says the man, "and this guy brings in way too much income for us, for you to kill him off like a fly." "So it'd be bad for business for you to tell me where they are, is it?" says Vince, as the man, scared to say anything, just shakes his head. "Yes." And so Vince looks at him with a smile, and then completely shifts his attitude in a split second as he punches the man straight in the nose, snapping the poor man's nose as the guy yells and covers his now bloody face, as Jasmine looks at Vince. "Oh, for fuck's sake, Vince. Was that really necessary?" she says to Vince. However, Vince ignores Jasmine as he looks at the man who now has a broken nose with blood dripping from his face and his palms. "It's also bad for business if you're dead," he says, "and talking back to your boss is normally a bad idea." Vince continues as he calmly lights a cigarette and inhales the smoke and exhales it in the face of the man. And so the man looks at Vince. "What are you gonna do?" kill me and then fight your way out of an entire building of genetic blessings? He says, with Jasmine's eyes widening. Really, Vince, you're harvesting this many genetic blessings? She says as Vince looks at her.
It's not what it seems like. Everything will be made clear. These genetic blessings didn't realize what happened to them, and so I took them off the street and gave them a job.
He says with Jasmine laughing at this. Well, yeah, drug dealing's a real good job. Great 401k plan. And the man looks at Jasmine. Wait a second, is she?
Yes,
Says Vince, interjecting.
she works for the GBA, and with her skills, she could most likely wipe out this entire building single-handedly.
Bluffs Vince. However, he then forms his force field into a ball in the palm of his hand as he points it at the man.
But if she fails, I simply have to blow up this entire building, and not one of them will be left standing by the time I'm done pounding my fists into each one of their skulls. It's a real simple plan,
He says. And the guy, now gulping and visibly worried. Alright, fine, says the guy as he raises his hands, showing that his face is covered in blood from the broken nose. He begins typing on his computer and prints off the information of where the two genetic blessings in question are located, which is in a city of New York. And as Vince looks at the papers,
Alrighty, looks like we got ourselves a plane ticket to the Big Apple.
he says to Jim and Alex as they walk out. Alex once again grabs the back of the blazer of Vince, and as they finally exit the building, Alex makes a big sigh of relief. You scare me so much. What if some of your bluffs don't work one of these days? We're screwed, she says to Vince. However, Vince just ignores her and Jasmine as they hop in the car and head to the airport. As Vince drives Alex and Jasmine to the airport, he looks out the corner of his eye to Alex, who sits in the back seat.
I need you to shut off every account he has, says Vince. I don't want him dealing or selling or making any profit whatsoever. And then you need to make a deal with him, pretending to be someone else,
says Vince as Alex looks at him. I've already done it. I knew exactly what you needed me to do, Vince. I'm not a child anymore, she says to him as she closes her laptop and puts it in the computer case. And so they take a flight where Jasmine is surrounded by only silence by Vince and Alex, as she wonders what might be going through their heads, and they seem visibly bothered, visibly upset. And Jasmine is curious, what could possibly upset Vince? Is it the fact that he is being forced to eradicate one of his genetic blessings, one of his members in the underground? Or is it something else? Because Alex was the one that found these targets. However, because of the expression on Vince's face, she does not believe that this is a setup or a trick to give Vince more power. She feels like Alex is truly doing what must be done for the greater good, even though it brings pain to Vince, and the curiosity of the two's relationship grows inside her, and they finally land at New York.
Where to, Alex?
says Vince as they get off the plane, and Alex looks at him. I have the address of the coffee shop that we will be meeting George and the little girl at. I will be sitting on the inside, doing what I do best, while you and Jasmine sit on the outside and await for the arrival of George, she says to Vince, and Jasmine's curiosity continues growing as the two are truly bothered at what they are doing, but she doesn't know why. And as they arrive at the coffee shop, Alex does exactly what she says as she orders a frappuccino and sets up a small makeshift office at one of the tables as Jasmine and Vince sit down at one of the tables on the outside.
And now we wait,
He says to Jasmine, and Jasmine looks at him. So, we are going to eradicate them? She says to Vince, and Vince looks at her.
Do you ever lose sleep at night, Jasmine?
Says Vince. What do you mean? She says, and Vince looks back at her.
Not all genetic blessings are bad people. Hell, not even all of them are fully grown. Do you know how many children have been killed by the GBA? All because we are too scared that they will make us unequal, that they will overthrow us as a race,
Says Vince. Why do you say us? Says Jasmine. You are one of them. You are a genetic blessing, says Jasmine as she's trying to understand what point Vince is getting to, and Vince looks at her.
See, that's part of the problem. Regardless of one's morals, of one's ambitions, of one's dreams and goals, one's age or gender, the second they become different, the second they have an ability that you have yet to obtain, they are now someone else. And it doesn't stop with genetic blessings, Jasmine. The second a poor man becomes rich, he is no longer one of you. He's now one of the rich. He's the evil. He's the target. He's the corrupt. As soon as a man who doesn't have the ability to protect his family gains a genetic blessing that allows him to do so, he's killed off, leaving that family behind. As soon as a child who's been abused gains a genetic blessing that allows him to finally be free of the abuser, he is then killed by the GBA, by you.
He says to Jasmine. However, Jasmine knows all of this. None of this is new to her. She understands what she has done, but she understands that it must be done, and so she looks into the eyes of Vince. Genetic blessings have the abilities to become gods, says Jasmine. The consumption type can consume multiple things throughout the world, whether that's energy or electricity, fire, light, blood, or just pure objects. They have endless limits with their genetic blessing. An aggressive type has the strength of a tank, has the strength of Hercules. Guardian types, more often than not, are impervious to bullets, are impervious to damage that the average man are capable of. Manipulation types can change the very fabric of reality, and mentalist types can mess with your own mind. They can control you. They can change the way you think. And would you really want someone like that? Would you really want someone like you to be a president, a dictator, a leader? Would you really want someone like you ruling this world? And if they populate enough and could create an entire society, humans will be nothing but slaves. She explains to Vince, but none of it sticks with him as he's heard it before, and he just stares at Jasmine.
Fear of the future should never dictate what you do to another person. You should have faith that they will be just like you and try to do what's right,
He says, and Jasmine crosses her arms and leans back in the chair. Like you? Yeah, you clearly try to do what's right, Mr. Drug Lord, Crime Lord, or whatever the hell you are, she says to him. Are you guys done arguing yet? Says Alex through the earpieces that Jasmine and Vince has.
Yeah, Alex, what's up?
He says, and Alex responds, well, our bogies are arriving, she says, as Vince quickly turns around to see George and the little girl walking up, and Jasmine quickly pulls out a fully condensed spear, and as she hits a button, it expands and grows to the shape and size of the normal 7-foot spear as she dives over the table towards George. George sees Jasmine with the spear and sees Vince and recognizes Vince as he quickly puts the pieces together. He grabs the little girl and starts running away as Vince shouts to Jasmine,
Hold on, we need to do this properly. I have a plan.
He says to her, and she looks back as she has already begun chasing the 2 genetic blessings. No way, Vince, I don't trust you one bit, she says. And she pulls out a small scanner and points it to the 2 of them. All right, what kind are you 2? She says to herself. And Vince looks at Alex and gives her a nod through the window in the coffee shop. And Alex begins typing on her laptop. And Vince slowly stands up with Jasmine and the 2 genetic blessing now out of sight. He tightens the vest, he tightens his tie, and he quickly tucks his blazer so that his suit is nice and form-fitting, and lights up a cigarette as he slowly begins walking in the direction of Jasmine and the 2 genetic blessings. And with Jasmine chasing the 2 genetic blessings, she notices that the stoplights are going instantly from green to red and from red to green, forcing traffic to force the 2 genetic blessings that are running from her into very precise and certain directions. As Vince is talking to Alex,
Keep sending them down the path, and when I tell you, you need to separate Jasmine from the 2 of them, and then separate the little girl. We must protect the little girl,
says Vince, and Alex responds, I already know the plan, Vince. I know what I'm doing. We've done it before. Never with Jasmine, responds Vince. Jasmine continues chasing the 2 genetic blessings. However, traffic has been manipulated so that she is having one of the hardest times keeping up with the 2 of them. And a light turns red just long enough for George, the fully grown drug dealer genetic blessing, to cross, and then quickly turns green, separating the 2 genetic blessings. And Jasmine sees George yelling for the girl to run, and Jasmine stands trying to figure out which one she should chase. And so she chases the little girl, for she's on the exact same side of the street as the little girl, and hopes that she can catch up to George later. And the words of Vince echoes in her head, and she knows that this little girl most likely has done nothing wrong, but she could grow up to be one of the most tremendous threats, depending on her genetic blessing. And as she looks at the scanner, she points it quickly to the little girl and sees that the little girl is a mentalist type, and if she grows and perfects her genetic blessing, she could easily be a threat level of 8, 9, or maybe even 10, and become nearly unstoppable by time she is an adult. And so Jasmine gets her spear ready and gets the loud whistling sound prepared on her spear and hits the button as it blares a loud noise, forcing the little girl to fall on her knees and plugging her ears, screaming in pain. And Vince has then walked around the corner, knowing where they would be at the exact same time they would be at, thanks to Alex. And Vince walks up to Jasmine. "I got this one if you want to go get the other one," Jasmine says, and Vince slowly grabs the spear. "He will be back for the little girl," he says as he tears the spear out of Jasmine's hands and snaps it over his leg, using his force field to create the strength he needs to snap pure metal. And Jasmine looks at him. "What the hell, are you betraying me again?" she says, and Vince looks at her seriously. "I'm doing exactly what I told you guys I am going to do," says Vince. "I am going to help you eradicate the genetic blessings, but I am not going to stand by and watch a child be murdered," he says to her as he walks to the little girl and gently puts his hand on her shoulder as he kneels down to her level. "This man that you are with, do you want to be with him, or has he hurt you?" says Vince as the little girl looks up at him with tears running down her face. He told me if I took a genetic blessing, he told me if I took the genetic blessing, I could be free, she says. And so Vince, looking at Jasmine, sees that Jasmine is struggling with her own moral compass as he looks back at the little girl. "And did it set you free?" he asks the little girl, and she shakes her head. "He makes me go into people's minds and turn them into addicts so that he can make money." And Vince looks at the little girl. "He's doing this to make money for my company, but you can damn well bet that he will not get away with this, and he is, in simple terms, fired," says Vince as he slowly grabs one of the hands of the little girl and looks at her with a gentleness that Jasmine had forgotten that Vince had. And Vince finally continues to speak. "If, with your permission, I get rid of this man, I will provide you with true freedom, the guidance and the care that you deserve, so that you can grow up to be
the woman you were meant to be. How does that sound? If you're willing to take the deal,
says Vince, and the little girl looks up and nods her head enthusiastically, but at the same time frightened. And as Vince looks back up, he sees George, the genetic blessing, walking towards Jasmine, himself, and the little girl. And so he stands and walks until he is between George and the little girl, with Jasmine standing on the side, not knowing what to do without her spear. And Vince looks at him.
I am going to kill you now,
says Vince.
You think you can kill me?
Says George, as his right arm becomes bulky and muscular. Jasmine looks at George. He's an aggressive type, she says. His only weakness is electricity. How do you plan on defeating this one? Says Jasmine, and Vince just looks at her through the corner of his eye.
Not with electricity, but with my own pure force. I have no limits. I do not rely on the lousy GBA toys,
says Vince, as he receives a punch from George and his bolstered arm. However, the force field protects Vince, and Vince returns the strike with an uppercut to the gut of George. However, George has quickly moved his muscles to his abdominal muscles and expands them to an unhumanly size, as it completely blocks and protects him from the punch of Vince. And Vince looks at George.
So, is that your plan? To move your muscles around and protect you from every strike I throw?
Says Vince, and George just responds,
That's my plan, and if I can hit you hard enough, that shield of yours will crack.
And Vince grows a smile on his face as he forms a force field around his fist and delivers another uppercut to the now bolstered abdominal muscles of George. However, this time it forces the ground to shake, and his fist goes through all the muscles and causes George to spew up blood from his mouth as he falls to his knees.
Yeah, that's not possible,
he says, and Vince looks at George.
I have no limits. Make your muscles as thick and as strong as possible. I will still hurt you. And like I said, I'm going to kill you,
says Vince, as George rises and starts throwing punch after punch to Vince, with the muscles adapting and making his right arm massive, while then quickly switching to his left arm, making his left arm massive. However, Vince just stands there with his force field protecting him from every punch.
My defensive abilities far outrank your own,
says Vince, as he delivers a punch to the gut to George. Once again, George falls to the ground, and then Vince delivers a roundhouse connecting to the skull of George. As George falls to the ground, he walks up to George and puts his foot on George's chest as he looks at Jasmine.
Shield of the little girl's eyes,
he says. And so Jasmine quickly runs to the little girl and puts her hand over the girl's eyes. And Vince forms his force field around his fist.
What you have done here is unforgivable, and I can't stand your kind,
says Vince as he delivers the punch directly down to the skull of George, with his skull being in between Vince's fist and the ground. His head explodes as blood spreads throughout the street and the sidewalk, with George now having a headless corpse. Vince picks his hand up, pulls out a nice rag, and wipes the blood off of his hand, throwing it down at George's now headless body, and looks at Jasmine.
We are going to leave now,
says Vince as he walks towards her, tightening his tie.
We have somewhere to go, and I have something to show you,
says Vince as he grabs the little girl and picks her up in a loving manner. And they walk back to the coffee shop where Alex meets them, and they take a flight back to Nevada, where Jasmine and Vince, the little girl, and Alex finally arrive. They go back to the fancy car, and Jasmine looks at Vince. Where are we going now? And Vince simply ignores her as they drive to the destination that Vince has decided. Jasmine then sees that the car has approached a building that looks somewhat like a school or an orphanage or something that would normally be owned by the government, and Vince opens the doors and lets out the timid little girl who has been through far more than she should have been through for her age. As Alex stays in the car, Vince invites Jasmine in, and as they enter the doors of the building, Vince is welcomed by countless children who have disformities and incredible countless abilities due to their genetic blessings. And Jasmine sees the love shown to Vince by all these children as a woman walks up to him and he pushes gently the little girl to the woman.
I got another one for you. She was taken advantage of and abused by a drug dealer,
says Vince, and the woman looks at him. I'll take care of her from here. Did you take care of the drug dealer? She says, and Vince smiles.
Yeah, he no longer walks the earth,
he says, and the woman smiles back at him. Good, very good. Well, I will do what I always do and make sure that she's happy, the woman says as she happily invites the little girl into her new home. And as Vince turns around to leave, there stands Jasmine, refusing to move, shocked at the amount of children that are here. These are a lot of genetic blessings. You are protecting a lot of genetic blessings, she says, and Vince looks at her.
No, I am protecting a lot of children. These are a lot of children, and they will not grow up to do what you think they're going to do. They're being raised by human beings,
he says, as Jasmine can't even believe what she just heard. Wait a second. Human beings? Mortal people are taking care of genetic blessing children, she says, and Vince, smiling at her.
Well, of course. If they're being taken care of by normal people while they're children, while they're the lowest on the food chain, then when the tables are turned, they'll remember the passion, the compassion. They'll remember the love that they were given by the humans. They're not gonna grow up to destroy the world, Jasmine.
And how can you be so sure? Says Jasmine, and Vince looks at her.
Because I trust that they will do the right thing and that they will have goodness in their hearts, the same way humans have that same trust in each other. They will not turn out like me, a drug lord, crime lord, or whatever the hell I am,
says Vince back to Jasmine as they leave the orphanage and go back to the GBA. The car ride is filled with nothing but silence. And as they enter the lot of the GBA, Jasmine looks at Vince. I don't agree with what you're doing, and I don't agree with what you did to us in the past, and I'll never forgive you for it, she says. But I agree with why you're doing it, and I understand why you did what you did so long ago, she says to Vince. And Vince's only response,
you cannot tell the chief or anybody about what you saw today. Do you understand? You must keep this between the two of us. I am practicing trust,
he says to her, and she nods. As Vince, Alex, and Jasmine return to the GBA, they see Al, Jim, and Jake have also returned from their mission. Though they are bloodied and bruised, they're okay. And Al looks at Jasmine. Well, that was a hell of a day. How was yours? And Jasmine gives nothing but a shrug in response to Al as she retires in her room for the night. And Vince decides to go in to the office of the chief. And he looks at the chief as the chief pours himself some whiskey.
So,
responds the chief,
how did it go?
And Vince, sitting down, lighting up a cigarette.
It went fine. What you thought was going to happen didn't happen,
he responds. And so the chief then sits down, sipping his whiskey, and stares intensely into the eyes of Vince.
Really? So she did not argue with you saving the little girl,
says the chief. And Vince looks back.
There was some argument, but when she saw what I've been doing, she understood my motivations,
responds Vince. And the chief, now calmly taking another sip of whiskey.
I take it that you do know the man behind the genetic blessings. I take it you know of the genetic blessing that is in charge of the other genetic blessings. I take it that you know who has climbed the ranks of power,
says the chief as he continues staring intensely into Vince's eyes.
I've never been one to play games,
says Vince.
I've known for quite some time that the man behind the curtain is you, old man. It has always been you,
says Vince as the chief sets down his glass of whiskey.
But you're not dumb enough to take me on, right, Vince?
Says the chief. And Vince, exhaling a large cloud of smoke out of his cigarette.
I'm not dumb enough to take you on yet, old man. I'm not dumb enough to take you on yet, but when I do, you can bet that you will pay for the pain you have brought to my family, and you can bet you will pay for all the pain you have brought to the innocent.
And the chief smiles back.
when the day comes, I'm sure that destiny will decide who's the victor. But for now, continue doing your job. And I look forward to our final bout, says the chief. And as Vince leaves the door and exits the office, he looks at Alex and gives her a wink, and the GBA retires for the night. And that is Part 1, Chapter 4 of Genetic Blessings, and I will be continuing it in Part 1, Chapter 5. If you guys have listened for this long, thank you so very much, and if you enjoyed, please do consider hitting the like and subscribe button. Take care of yourselves, do not get hit by a meteor, and bye.